Hello, ladies. How are you doing? Um, I'm kind of doing a quick piece here because I got a lot of questions about my experience at MSNBC. Uh, because I think when I looked at what I wrote, what I talked about, I think that I need to clarify a couple things. So, one of the things I think also puts the time period into perspective, and when I look back at what was actually going on with MSNBC, and for those of you who missed it, you'll have to look at the previous recording. But basically, I was there, I believe, in its first year. And it was this new concept of news and technology merging. And it was MS being Microsoft and NBC being the broadcast company coming together under the parent company of GE. And I had gotten offer to work there when they were actually in the Fort Lee office, which was a smaller space. And then they moved to the Secaucus office, which was huge. And it was when they had constructed all this new style technology for news in this office space, or media space, I guess you would call it. It's not really like offices the way you think of an office. This is a studio. So the gentleman, everybody kept asking about the gentleman that came up to me, and was that really my reaction, amongst other things. The first thing is to say, I think he said something to reference to a merit scholarship, and that wasn't exactly what it was that he said. I was looking at some notes I had from back in the day, and some diaries. And I think what was really said was the word quota. And I was a little taken aback by that because, one, I had never heard anyone reference that to our generation, Generation X. And I think, I think most of that, people can tell me if I'm incorrect, was more notable maybe in our baby boomer parents' generation. And I guess this gentleman probably was listening to a lot of what his baby boomer parents, or maybe they were golden year parents, I don't really know, and decided or felt like he could approach me that way. Which is kind of hilarious in a sense, because first of all, I was very, very fortunate that my parents worked extremely hard to move to Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And I went through the public Cherry Hill school district. And I actually have an article somewhere, but during the 90s, Cherry Hill was rated number 5 in the country of best school districts. And I was in honors. I was in accelerated classes. I also was very active. I was president of my class, etc. I was in the broadcast team, amongst many other things. And we were also just starting, I think it's more prevalent now, I think they call it like the International Bachelor Program or something like that. But they had just started AP courses where you could test out of college courses. So I was also in AP courses. And I, unbeknownst to a lot of people, I got accepted to over 25 schools. I actually stopped counting after a while. I was actually in this new counseling system where they were kind of utilizing my academic accolades to see, what would be offered from other schools. So that's why I ended up with so many. I mean, it was really way over 25 schools. After a while, I just stopped counting the offers that came in because I had to start researching. And like I said, I actually graduated a year early. So I went from 10th grade, came back as a 12th grader. So it was really a rush to apply, visit, all the things you have to do, as many of you know, to put your kids in college and go away to college. So I didn't have a lot of time, and we didn't have technology like you do now to research even scholarships. I think now when you sign up online, I saw one of my girlfriends whose son was applying to college, and it's almost like the system automatically analyzes you and says, here's some grants and scholarships you should apply for. We didn't have all that. And I think in a previous tape, I explained how when I got to GW, they were wondering why I hadn't applied for this arts scholarship because of my talent in performing. And I told them I didn't know about it. Nobody had informed me about it. So another thing to note about Cherry Hill, which I think is interesting, is I think because when this article came out, and from what I understand, Cherry Hill is what's called the benchmark school of New Jersey. It was the model, I think, for a lot of schools in New Jersey. So I remember there was a writer from Essence magazine who came to our high school to do a story on, I think they were doing a story on schools and colleges. And the gentleman's name was Kevin Powell. Kevin Powell was known for being on MTV's Real World. And I believe now he's like in government in New York. Ironically, I met Kevin my senior year of high school, and then my senior year of college, he came to our school to speak on African American males, Black youths. And it was so funny because I think that day it was him, and I believe it was also Debra Lee from BET. I did meet Debra Lee as well. I think Debra Lee at that time was vice president. So it might have been the same day. If it wasn't the same day, then maybe we had Debra one day and then we had Kevin another day. But pretty much the same format. Might have been one of the culture clubs at GW. But anyway, Kevin did an article, and I remember he was set to follow me around, I believe, in Cherry Hill. And at that time, I was president of the school. I was on the leadership council. I was pretty much everything you could think of I was doing. And so he remembered me. I was so shocked my senior year of college because he's like, oh my God, he's like, you were just doing like everything in broadcasting. And I don't know if I was in the article he wrote. Interesting to know. But he definitely remembered who I was and remembered my background. So that kind of gives you a perspective on the high school that I went to. And I was very blessed and very fortunate that my parents, who didn't have the same opportunities that I had, worked hard to place me in an environment that provided an excellent school district. And of course, with them working hard, you have to work hard. So, and I did. I was working extremely hard in school. So when this gentleman came up to me after completing George Washington University, which, as I explained to you, wasn't an easy school either, and tried to say that I was only accepted because of, wasn't merit scholarship quotas, I think is the word. It was, how did I feel? I was so busy with the news. Someone asked, like, what did you do? What did you say? There was a lot going on at MSNBC. And like I said, you'll have to read the book for that. But, it was a rude statement to walk up to somebody you just met and say that. And I think when people, I've grown to learn, come at you like that, and they don't really know who you are. And I spoke to the young women in Alabama, and I actually did a whole section on haters and jealousy, specifically for young women, and also to encourage young women to come together and work together and kind of put the jealousy and hate into perspective as not being productive for them. And what I noted was that a lot of times people are insecure about something in their own lives. Either they're insecure about finances, their educational level, experiences they have about their appearance, and they come at others because of the pain or insecurity that they are experiencing. And I think I had a lot of that understanding growing up, thanks to my mother. So I was not quick to react. And I think that was one of the biggest issues in a lot of environments. People stereotype, and they think that a person is going to react to certain things said, certain things done, and they become very disappointed when dealing with me. So everyone's asking, like, well, what was your reaction? What happened? The facts are, out of all the 25 schools that wanted me, and like I said, this is Gen X, our future prospects were supposed to be a little different. It wasn't supposed to be all this economic going into, like the 1920s, but worse, that we never saw before, and credit crunches and mortgage crises and all those things. We were thinking in terms of things evolving and money being available to those who got a college education. So I picked, I think, the only school out of the 25 plus that did not provide a scholarship to me. And like I said, I didn't have the time to apply for everything, but that I did end up picking the school that did not provide a scholarship. And I was not on a program. A lot of people, there are like programs like Inroads and some other programs that students, end up in schools for. And why is that important? It's important because the program wants you to succeed. So if you're not on those programs, you have to find ways to succeed on your own. So in reference to the question, basically, and my reaction, I thought it was rude. I thought it was ignorant. And it was by far not my personal experience. So what exactly would I be reacting to? So again, I like to put my experiences into new perspective as you get older. And I think that looking back, it was a startup company. And I think one of the telling things that I kind of remember, and there are lots of stories, which I'll probably add to the book, but I remember when I first got there, they offered a limo to pick you up to go to work and to take you home, because they considered you essential to this all news network. Then, like a couple months later, a memo went out saying, we're going to only give like the one person limo to executive staff and anchors, and everyone else will be designated at one person's home, centrally located, so everyone could come to work. So like, 4 or 5 people could fit in a limo to come to work. And then a couple months after that, another memo went out, and it said only the anchors or executive staff will have the limo. We now have charter buses, and there will be charter buses at specific locations, and people can take the charter bus to get to work, and it will leave. And if you don't get on the bus, it's up to you to figure out how to get to work. Fortunately, I had a car, so after they took the single limo away, I was already driving to work. And then another memo came out a couple of months later that said anchors and executive staff now have to ride the charter bus with the rest of the staff, or you could, use your own means of transportation. And as I was like going out the door, the last memo was like, okay, everybody, you just got to get to work on your own. So they were a struggling new company going through a lot of different changes and transitions. It was a very young group of people in its first startup that were also not only learning news, learning this new company, and this new thing of converging media and technology. So, education, which is a very hot topic these days. It's interesting to kind of look back at the education that I was provided with, because I was growing up in a time of the height of the concept of multicultural education. And also, I start to feel like I became like a representative, I want to say, of what could happen to a student taken from K through 12 who was a minority in this district. She could end up getting accepted to 25 colleges and graduating early. Although they weren't really happy about me graduating early. So that's another story for another day. But looking at that aspect of education also puts a perspective on how we think. My school district was tracked. So there was modified, regular, accelerated, and honors AP. I think the tracks were redone years later, and I think the schools were redone a couple of years later. But we were tracked during that time period. So what's interesting too, not that I want to bring up the crazy elections this year, but I just read an article that stated that the Gen X, or my generation, is frustrated and has become attracted to the Donald Trump specifically and the Bernie Sanders, based on this frustration that I guess Gen Xers are feeling. And I started thinking about that for a second, and I started thinking about how we were tracked in school. And it seems like when I run through my social media and I see who's rah-rahing, it seems like those who were in modified and regular tracks are going this way towards Donald Trump. A sprinkle of people from other tracks, but for the most part, it's that modified regular track group. And then the accelerated and honors are going towards your Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. So it also makes me dig a little bit deeper into American education. And what I started to think about was when 9/11 hit. And I don't remember whether it was a story we were working on, but it was something major I was involved with. And I remember them saying that we are producing in these preparatory schools that produced many of our leaders, people who essentially didn't understand or couldn't communicate with the rest of the world as we were moving to globalization, because they truly didn't understand how this radical group thought. And I started to think about, for those of us who are the majority of, I guess, voters, and our education coming from essentially a Eurocentric perspective up until the 90s, that influences, unless you went through other growth processes, more college experiences and so on and so forth, work, etc., that kind of shape who you're going to be voting for in an election. And I believe that your educational level to look at the issues become more important than what you see on the television screen, and how it applies to your lives. And I think that when you not only look at the circumstances you might be in, how this candidate can improve or affect your life negatively or positively, you also have to look towards the future. Not just the future for how it affects you and your family, but where we are in reference to the rest of the world. Because that's extremely important in making decisions now, because we are social with the rest of the world. Another thing I'd just like to note, with a recent experience I had in reference to education, there was a woman in a store who was probably from the baby boomer generation, and she looked like she'd been having a good time during the baby boomer generation. I might be prejudging that, but looked like she was accustomed to a certain lifestyle, a certain way of living. And there was a young person who had came in and now I guess was her boss. And they were from the millennial generation, from the way she was talking about the story. And all I remember her saying, even though there were other issues involved with the story, is she kept saying college kid, this college kid, that, this college kid, this college kid. And as I was listening to her story, I was reflecting on the fact that the issue is not about her being a college kid. The issue is about technology. Technology in the workplace, which probably requires you to go get some more skills at college or vocational school. And also in communication, because she was expecting this respect for age and I guess experience, so to speak. And the young woman didn't know quite how to communicate with her. So as I was thinking about the story, first of all, we, not to label millennials, but they don't respond to authority the way previous generations responded, because they've seen things like banks that are too big to fail, and they have access to social media for the truth or the other side of things that we didn't have. We just took icons and those who were the leaders or whatever aspect it was in as the authority on everything. But the millennial group doesn't have that same concept. The other thing is to know that you're talking about a group that has been communicating through text messages, emails, computers all of their lives. And it started to occur to me that actually there should be work training to help maybe this group with social skills with previous generations. Like maybe they should institute that in college. I'm quite sure they're learning about the previous generation, but learning about it and learning how to communicate with them is probably different. Or simply they don't really want you to be able to communicate because the world is changing to robots and automation, and they just want you to figure that out. But that's what I heard from the interaction and the issue. And once I explained that to the woman, she kind of had a different perspective. And I proudly announced that I too was a college student. But I just want to say something to those baby boomers who constantly point at the generation and almost demeaningly try to present your college degree as being an issue. It's nonsense, and it needs to stop. Because it's hypocritical to women's rights. It's hypocritical to civil rights. So what were you marching for in the 60s if it weren't for your children to have better opportunities to move your culture or your gender or society forward? And at that time, this is what they told us would help and assist with that. Education is very important. It is very important to moving us forward. Of course, it's not a perfect system. It's a system that's constantly evolving. And yes, probably during the era that was set up by baby boomers who, figured we'd have all this money influxed into society during your Generation X or Gen Y kids' lifestyles. It's, we didn't start the fire. The issues that happen with the economy are being accredited to a generation prior. So take that into consideration when you're talking to your children and your grandchildren or interacting with people in a workplace. Remember that, yes, education has changed. Yes, education is moving towards access for all. And also for those who recently get higher levels of education to respect that the process for education now is different than the process before. So whereas I was saying a lot of things are at your fingertips through a computer, your Gen X, baby boomers, and so on and so forth had to develop different types of skills for research and more labor-like work to academics. It wasn't readily available through the computers. So that produces a different thought, a different person that you're interacting with. But it's really nonsense when I hear people. It goes back to the jealousy hater thing, in the sense of you're really reflecting on an insecurity that you need to deal with. So if that means that you need to go back to school and refresh your skills, or go get the degree, because it's more accessible and more available now. It also, I believe, millennials that everyone talks about, probably on jobs need, like they had diversity training, you probably need social training. I don't think anybody's thought of that yet, but you probably need to. I think it would make us more productive as a society, and probably make the office atmosphere more productive. But then again, we're moving to less office atmospheres. Thanks for listening to what's a little bit more than about television, media, and plus size modeling, kind of on a soapbox today. I am the international brand ambassador for Sexy and Wealthy in Heels.